Hi, everybody. So in this lecture, we are going to go over some basics about MLA citations, quoting, and paraphrasing. And specifically, we're looking at how you can do these things and how you should be using those things in your summary and response essay. Okay. So first, just some basics about using outside information. Anytime you use anything that comes from anywhere else, it's important that you give credit to the original author or authors. And if you skip this step, your essay will be flagged for plagiarism, which is all bad and has some bad consequences, such as getting a 0 on the assignment. And if it happens more than one time, getting reported to the dean, and it's a whole big thing. So we definitely want to avoid plagiarism, especially because most of the time when this happens, it's not on purpose. So that's what this lecture is going to help you to avoid. So when you're using outside information, you might sum it up in your own words, or you might quote it directly. And those have two different terms. So the first one is a paraphrase, and that means I summed this information up in my own words, but I got the idea from someone else or from somewhere else. The other option is a direct quote, and that happens when you quoted something word for word just as it was said elsewhere. So we'll look at how to deal with both of those so that you can avoid plagiarism. So first, just basic kind of terms to know for my classes. You will hear me refer to the quote sandwich a lot. And there's a whole other lecture about this. So if you haven't watched that one yet, go ahead and head to my YouTube channel. You can look at quote sandwiches for your particular essay and what that might look like. But basically, this means that you are going to sandwich in any outside information that you use. So it's important to include a topic sentence and then a signal phrase, then your direct quote or paraphrase. Cite that quote in MLA because that's the way that our class cites, and then explain the significance of the quote. So when we are doing citations, there are a couple of different ways that you can cite that outside information. One of those things is called an in-text citation, and this is the kind of citation that you are going to be using in your essay, in your paragraphs, in your quote sandwiches. When you're using outside evidence, you need to cite that, and when you cite it, it's called an in-text citation. So that's just a good term to know. So these citations come after a quote or a paraphrase, and it includes some basic information. So you should include your author's last name as well as the page where the information that you are citing occurred in the original text. And there are a couple of tricks for this. So if you say the author's name in the same sentence as the quote, then you only use the page number. If your source has more than one author, then you will use the last name of author one and then the phrase et al. So we have some examples over here. So for instance, if my author's name is in the same sentence, then I only need the page number, right? So just a 1 in parentheses. This is what a basic in-text citation would look like. I've got my author's name and then the page number right after that. And then we've got some kind of what-if scenarios, right? So let's say that Fujinami and several other people wrote this particular thing. Then I'm going to say Fujinami et al., and then the page number where this occurred. What about if you have no author? First, make sure that you have the okay to use this particular source, because if a source doesn't have an author, it is automatically very suspicious. But assuming there's no author and I have said, yes, you can use that, then you need to make sure that you only include just the page number. So in-text citations happen in parentheses after a quote, but before punctuation for the sentence. And I have made you a handy-dandy flow chart for how to figure out what information to put in parentheses at the end of your quote. So first, you need to ask yourself, am I using a quote or a paraphrase? If not, then you don't need a citation. If you are, then you can follow the rest of the arrows to figure out what all you need to include. So, for instance, did you use the author's name in the same sentence as your quote or paraphrase? If not, then you're going to include the author's last name and the page number. If you did, then you only need the page number. What if there's more than one author? If there are two, this is what it's going to look like. If there are three, then this is what it's going to look like. What if there is no author? Then again, you need to make sure that you have gotten approval to use this source. If you've done that, then you're just going to use the first word of the title along with the page number. So hopefully this kind of infographic helps you out. But of course, you can always ask me, ask somebody in your group, or ask a tutor for help with citations. So you heard me talk about both paraphrases and also direct quotes. So when do I paraphrase? Paraphrasing is a good choice if your writing assignment does not require quotes from outside sources. It's also a good choice if you're summing up a concept or an idea in your own words. And if you're discussing something where it's not necessary to include specific details, okay? So for example, if it's something that I can kind of sum up, right? Like this very famous sign and slogan. But if I were to just sort of put it in my own words and make it look a little bit different using similar meaning words, that would be a paraphrase. Now, I would still have to give my author credit, right? Because I am not the one who came up with this particular phrase. So it would still be necessary to go through all of these steps to decide, what I need to tell my readers about this particular paraphrase. But the paraphrased information itself doesn't have to go in quotation marks. So what does a paraphrase look like? And how do I do that? So the first thing is to let readers know that you are borrowing an idea from somewhere and kind of let them know where this idea is coming from. So you do still need to have all of that basic introductory information before a paraphrase, just like you would have it with a quote. And so I've kind of color-coded this here for you. So this part is in pink. So in my example here, I'm letting my readers know that researchers looked at what happens if a common children's toy Legos were swallowed in this article. And so I give them the title of the article and I mention the authors. Okay, so now my reader understands, okay, some outside information is coming and here's where it's coming from. After that, I'm going to sum up the idea in my own words, and I do not need to use quotation marks here. So that's all of this orange stuff here. This is my paraphrase. So I summed up a particular part of the article, but I explained it in my own words so that I'm not sharing any of the same words with the original, and it just worked out better for me. So that's a paraphrase. I still also need a citation. So I still need to use that in-text citation at the end so that I can avoid plagiarism. And you'll notice that this article has 3 authors. So I'm using author 1, et al., and then the number 1 because that happens to be where the quote occurred. All of that information is in parentheses, and it's followed by my punctuation for this sentence. So that is how you can paraphrase or just kind of sum up some information in your own words. So remember to always still introduce the source and still include a citation. So what about quoting directly? Direct quotes are a good choice if your writing assignment does require the use of outside quotations. If you need to explain something in exactly the same way the author or authors did, and if you're dealing with a complex idea or terminology. So for example, let's say that I want to quote Bob Ross. We don't make happy mistakes, just happy little accidents. I would include quotation marks and I would make sure that my reader knows where that's coming from, right? Of course, if this was in, a paragraph, I would need to include more information than that, but that's just an example. So what do I do if I am quoting directly? Lots of the same things that I did when I was paraphrasing are also going to happen here. So for instance, I still need to let readers know where this information is coming from. So I've got an example here with the same article that we used for the paraphrasing slide. So I'm still telling people there's a study, here's the title and the authors, right? I'm also using a signal phrase. So now that I'm using a direct quote, a signal phrase is important. So my signal phrase has a subject and a verb, and it lets my reader know that somebody else is speaking so that they can kind of differentiate between myself, the author of this paper, talking compared to somebody else that I am referring to speaking now. So now I'm letting my readers know the doctors involved in the study did warn that these particular things, when swallowed, are dangerous, right? So using quotation marks lets my readers know that this is no longer me talking. Now this is somebody else, right? So these are the exact same words as this particular doctor that I'm citing. And then after your quote, you need to, again, cite in MLA format. So the citation happens to be pretty much the same, right? We've got the author et al., because this one has multiple authors, and then the page number. In this case, it was on page 2. So a direct quote looks slightly different. The major differences are that you should use a signal phrase, quotation marks, right? That lets my reader know that somebody else is speaking now. But in terms of introducing and citing, that part stays the same. So how am I going to use this information in the summary and response essay? In this essay, you do not need outside quotations because we are summarizing 2 short texts, and then the rest is just you talking about your own experience. However, you might want to paraphrase in your summaries, and if you do, that's okay. Just make sure that you're paraphrasing accurately and that you're citing an MLA so that you can make sure to avoid any plagiarism. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to text me on the Remind app, and I'm happy to